Welcome to the 30-26 breakdown. I am Jon Lee, and today I have another MMA riddle for you. When is a loss not really a loss? I'm talking, of course, about Cub Swanson versus the Korean Superboy in their Fight of the Year candidate. I wish I had gotten this up right away, but your boy has had a rough week. Your boy being a term of endearment, speaking about myself, versus your mans, which is when I'm talking about someone that I don't really understand. But your boy had a rough week, so I'm talking about Cub Swanson versus Korean Superboy now. What a fight, man. That was the fight of the year to me. Some people say Carlos Condit versus Robbie Lawler. To those people, I say rewatch that fight again. That fight was good, but it didn't have the massive swings this one did. The fifth round's amazing. The fifth round of that fight is probably the round of the year. But the rest of that fight, like Carlos Condit hunting and pecking and point fighting, was whatever. I mean, Robbie Lawler is a beast, but that fight, rewatch that fight. This was the fight of the year. I don't even think it's a candidate. It was just absolutely the best fight I've seen this year. It was amazing. Cub Swanson was talking about how he doesn't even hit heavy bags as hard as he was hitting the Korean Superboy. It had momentum swings. It had the Greg Jackson corner audio where he was screaming, "God damn it, discipline," and telling his other underling to shut up. That fight was the fight of the year. But it got me thinking about losses that aren't really losses. I actually predicted Cub Swanson would win. I didn't bet it because I put all my money on Max Holloway. But I did think Cub Swanson was going to win because I thought it was too much of a jump up in competition. And you see this a lot in MMA, and it's actually better for guys in the long run. One of the best examples was Max Holloway, who was thrown to Conor McGregor in, I believe, his third or fourth UFC fight. And since then hasn't lost, right? So sometimes a loss isn't really a loss, and I think for the Korean Superboy, this is actually going to be the point of his career where he starts to kind of rein things in, get a little less wild, stops relying on power all the time. These are all lessons that guys have to learn, and you don't learn those when you're winning. My buddy Dan Levy of the Half the Battle podcast, which is an awesome podcast you should all listen to, definitely the best podcast on gambling in MMA. He talks about everyone taking their first UFC loss, and sometimes a loss is exactly what the doctor ordered. And if you look back at the history of the UFC, you'll see that oftentimes dominant champions needed to lose in order to fix issues they had in their game or in order to kind of relieve the pressure of being undefeated, which is its own kind of mental pressure on a guy. So honestly, if you look back through MMA history, there's a lot of examples of this. I touched on Max Holloway versus Conor McGregor. Krzysztof Jotko versus Siedenblad's another example recently, where Jotko got that first UFC loss, learned that he needed to deal with his grappling, and since then has just been a beast. But I'll give you a couple other examples because I think these three are kind of the best three in the sport. Number one, Jon Jones versus Matt Hamill. When is a loss not a loss? When you lose, quote unquote, you can't see me doing the air quotes here, by elbowing a dude the wrong way. Jon Jones was whooping Matt Hamill's ass. I always say, Matt Hamill doesn't even think he won this fight. No one thinks Jon Jones lost, but that one loss relieved Jon Jones of the pressure of being undefeated. Jon Jones is essentially undefeated, but we never hear about that, and that's not a storyline he has to deal with because he got this one quote-unquote loss by disqualification. Think about Jon Jones. I love Jon Jones, but Jon Jones is a fucking head case, man. Can you imagine what Jon Jones would be doing? Jon Jones is talking about going out and getting blackout drunk so he has an excuse to lose fights. Imagine if he had the added pressure of being undefeated on his head. That dude probably would have committed suicide or something, or homicide or, something way, way worse. I really think Jon Jones is super lucky that he got that first quote-unquote loss out of the way because it took that pressure of being undefeated off of him, even though Jon Jones is fucking undefeated. So GSP actually has two of these. GSP versus Matt Hughes the first time where he got armbarred, and GSP versus Matt Serra. And you can see that GSP learned a lot from both of those fights. from the Matt Hughes fight, he got confidence. He went into the first Matt Hughes fight. He talked about how he was his idol, blah, 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 blah. And, he paid too much respect to Matt Hughes, ended up paying the price, learned that he had to be confident, that he had to impose his will. That's also where the GSP championship nutshot started originating, from their second fight. From then on, GSP checked everyone's cup, man. Check the tape. And then the second one against Matt Serra, where he basically learned to be not overconfident. And those are kind of two sides of the coin, right? Like, GSP first had to learn to be confident, and then he had to learn to not take guys too lightly. And he also had to learn that he could be knocked out, and that turned him into kind of the safety-first fighter that he became over the second half of his career. So GSP's whole career can basically be defined by these two losses in both his style, his confidence, his approach, his professionalism. All of that stuff really comes down to these two losses. What is it with Matt's? And then just this year, we saw Conor McGregor lose to Nate Diaz, and Conor Rubish had a post on Bloody Elbow he had written called The Puncher's Path or something about Conor McGregor and how he was kind of losing his defensive sensibilities and really just relying on his power and his chin as he rocketed through the UFC, And that first fight with Nate Diaz showed him that that's not going to be able to work against every guy. And he really cleaned up his technique. In that second fight, he, took the training a lot more seriously. He did all the crazy training camp stuff. And not that it really worked. He's still kind of gassed. But that fourth round, I don't think McGregor fights that fourth round if he doesn't lose to Diaz the first time. Like, if he's in another tough fight, like let's say he blows through Diaz in their first fight, and then he's in a tough fight with, Eddie Alvarez or someone. That's a bad example because he smoked Eddie. But, let's say he runs into Tony Ferguson or Khabib and he's in a tough fight. Now he knows he can dig down, he can be technical, he can get gassed and then gather himself again. And he kind of has that knowledge and that confidence. And he also knows that his power is not going to get everyone out of there. So that really helped Conor McGregor to become a better fighter as well, and was kind of pivotal to him becoming the champ. Being undefeated in the UFC is dangerous. Like I talked about before, like Dan always talks about, everyone takes that first UFC loss. It's just a matter of when. And being undefeated in the UFC leads to tougher matchmaking and guys being overconfident. You start to believe your own bullshit. I mean, it makes sense. You're in the UFC, you're killing guys, especially if you're blasting through guys, getting finishes like McGregor was. You start to kind of feel like you're never going to lose. So really oftentimes, the best thing for a guy's career is to take that early L. And there's a life lesson in that too. You're going to take losses in life. And getting them out of the way helps you to kind of become better in the future. So, a lot of times guys need to feel that burn, make the necessary corrections, and success is a bad teacher. Failure is just a much, much better teacher. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Thanks.